Now, first we are joined by a very special guest who's been touring Australia. I speak, of course, of cardiologist, public health advocate and medical freedom enthusiast, Dr. Aseem Malhotra. Aseem, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you for having me, Alexandra.
Look, Cara has been singing your praises in the Spectator magazine for months now, but I must say it is a very brave move to visit Australia, given that we have been trending on social media for years, famous as the lockdown capital of the world, with a government that threw pensioners to the ground in public parks, pepper sprayed little old ladies and shot citizens with rubber bullets. Is this the most unusual way that you've seen a public health crisis treated?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Alexandra. I was trying to figure out, actually, why did Australia do this? Why were you the most draconian in terms of these measures? And I think some of it is probably related to the fact that when it comes to public health, Australia has done many great things historically. So, for example, you were one of the first countries in the world to introduce compulsory seatbelts in cars. You were one of the first countries in the world to really crack down on big tobacco and introduce tobacco control policies. So I think you have a history of being good with public health. But unfortunately, as we all know now, the measures that were implemented in relation to COVID, whether it was lockdowns, whether it was mandating vaccines, have been at best misguided and at worst have caused considerable harm. You know, the cure has been worse than the disease. And unfortunately, despite all of Australia's previous public health successes, this has been a public health disaster for you.
Well, I think also we've lost a bit of faith in our medical industry. I must say that after what we've seen happen in Australia in particular, I'm not sure how bad it was where you come from in Europe, but we have seen our medical professionals behave in a way that is at a conflict to what we thought we would expect them to behave like. Did that surprise you, how the medical community reacted to COVID?
To some degree, yes, Alexandra. I think that in many ways, you know, when I've written about this, and what I'm doing in my lectures is really to try to get people to understand the root cause of the health crisis even before the pandemic, but what has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And ultimately, it's the both visible and invisible increasing unchecked power of very powerful corporations, in this case, for example, Big Pharma, whose only interest is to produce profit for shareholders. And in that process, often, actually, and this term has even been referenced by Richard Horton in The Lancet, who came to my lecture in London. I call it the psychopathic determinants of health. So what does that mean? Multinational corporations often behave in fulfill criteria as legal entities of psychopathy, right? Disregard, callous unconcern for the safety of others, repeated lying, conning others for profit, incapacity to experience guilt. So if one understands that that's at the root cause of the issue, then everything else that happens as a result of that downstream can be explained and rationalized. And unfortunately, that capture has also included the culture of medicine, which primarily should be there to produce, to work in the interests of patients and act from a place of informed consent and ethics. But even our profession, unfortunately, has been tainted to some degree by these external pressures, commercial influence. And I think that probably to some degree explains this behavior from many sections of the medical profession.
Well, yes, if you give anything in society a very narrow focus, in this case, keep people from getting COVID, then you do tend to forget about the other necessities of humanity, such as to live a life or to be able to engage in the rest of society.